President of the Global Governance Institution. Thank you for partnering with Pandesal Forum for this unique webinar. Welcome and good afternoon to everyone. This is a unique and good opportunity for top Philippines and China geopolitics experts and intellectuals to discuss the very important relationship between two ancient friends and allies, two neighbors, our country, the Philippines and China, and assessing the past 6 years of President Duterte's diplomacy and the future. Here at Pandesal Forum, this is a forum in the Philippines where we invite leaders, newsmakers to dialogue with media and intellectuals in a freewheeling media forum over Filipino traditional bread of pandesal and coffee or tea. We are very happy to have this topic today because there's a saying that good relations with a neighbor is more important than relationship with a relative far away. And China is our very important neighbor. There's also a saying that during hard times and in times of trouble, you will see who your true friends are. In the last 6 years, the Philippines experienced, of course, the global pandemic. And when Philippines could not buy vaccines from the West, China came to the rescue, gave us free vaccines and other supplies. Then also during our war on terrorism, other experts can discuss later on, we could not source arms from some countries in the West. China also gifted us and supported the Philippines. So the independent foreign policy of President Duterte is very refreshing reform. One of the achievements of the Duterte administration, we believe. He has normalized Philippine relationship with the world's next rising economic superpower. So we are very fortunate to have this change, and we look forward to our experts from the Philippines and China to help us reassess the past 6 years, what happened, where did we do correctly, and how do we improve on the future direction of bilateral relationship. One of our hopes here at Pandesal Forum is our experts hopefully could also discuss and recommend how we can make Philippine-China relationship be free or immune from political uncertainties. What I mean is, how do we make it stable, long-term, and all-weather relationship? Doesn't matter whether it's the opposition, red, yellow, pink, or what color of politics. Philippine-China relationship hopefully will be immune from political uncertainties. Once again, thank you to all our experts for your time and sharing your wisdom. And once again, thank you to Global Governance Institution for co-organizing this meaningful webinar. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Flores, for your kind, warm, and encouraging remarks. And also thanks for identifying those challenges and questions this afternoon, which would tackle with these problems. Now, let me turn to my role as the moderator of the meeting. We did have some framing questions. To answer those questions, we are very honored today to assemble a great group of serious scholars. For the interest of time, I will introduce them one by one when they make their presentations. Before I kick off the discussion, some housekeeping rules. First, this is an open and transparent discussion so that we encourage the speakers to speak as freely and frankly as they could. Second, we expect more perspectives than only information, and I will encourage speakers to share more of their constructive opinions. And finally, as for the time allocation, each keynote speaker is expected to make a presentation of a maximum of 10 minutes and 8 minutes for commentators, followed by moderated discussions and Q&As. The order of the speakers has been listed in the agenda. And without further delay, please allow me to first invite Mr. Wu Shicun, founding president of the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, chairman of the board, China Southeast Asia Research Center on the South China Sea, to share his views. Mr. Wu, the floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you, Captain King, and also good afternoon to our distinguished participants and scholars to this event. I'm happy to be part of this event to discuss the maritime cooperation between China and the Philippines and our bilateral relations in the future. In my presentation, I'm going to look at three issues. One is about the current South China Sea situation, because it is helpful for us to facilitate discussions on maritime cooperation between China and ASEAN countries and bilateral relations between China and the Philippines. And the second, I would like to discuss on how to promote maritime cooperation between China and ASEAN countries. And finally, if time allows, I would like to address the future bilateral relations between China and the Philippines. First, about the current South China situation, against the backdrop of the lingering COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and the geopolitical conflicts in various forms, the South China Sea faces many uncertainties and dilemmas in cooperation at sea. The current South China situation is featured by, number one, in my opinion, the new and biased US policy towards the South China Sea is the biggest external factor undermining peace and stability in the South China Sea. Since it gave up its neutrality on the South China Sea in 2020, the hallmark was the statement given by then the Secretary of the United States on July 13th, 2020. So since that time on, the United States has been moving fast in building a modular alliances and partnership system, and conducting strategic encirclement of China through four major mechanisms. The Quad Security Dialogue with Japan, India, and Australia, which just concluded this year's summit meeting in Tokyo just a couple of days ago. The AUKUS military alliances with United Kingdom and Australia. The alliances with Japan and the cooperation with the Philippines and Vietnam. The focus is on the military containment of China. In the US Indo-Pacific strategy, the above mini-lateral security cooperation mechanisms have different yet overlapped priorities and divisions of labor. Among them, the Quad shows signs of expanding into the South China Sea. The United States, the Philippines, and Vietnam are making step-by-step progress in their institutional and regular cooperation on maritime intelligence sharing, base use, equipment support, and policy coordination on the South China Sea issue. That is number one. Number two, the US military presence and activities under the framework of its new Indo-Pacific military strategy are the biggest driving force in the militarization in the South China Sea. The Biden administration aims to build an equilibrium of influence to the United States' preferences and values. It has launched new military programs such as integrated deterrence and Pacific deterrence to step up deployment of strategic forces in the South China Sea and the surrounding areas. In the militarizing the South China Sea, the United States has conducted forward deployment, military exercises, freedom navigation operations, and closing reconnaissance operations and other activities targeted at China in the South China Sea. As a result, interaction between China and the United States is evolving into strategic confrontation, featuring deterrence and counter-deterrence, reconnaissance and counter-reconnaissance, control and under control. On top of standing more about one nuclear-powered submarine and one aircraft carrier task force to the South China Sea every month on average, a series of US moves are undermining the strategic balance in the South China Sea and the surrounding areas, making the China-US military competition increasingly white hot and triggering an arms race in Southeast Asia and other parts of the Indo-Pacific region on conventional weapons, including submarines, missiles, and air defense systems. Number 3, unilateral actions by some government countries, particularly oil and gas development and island expansion in disputed waters, are the main internal cause of tensions in the South China Sea, in my opinion. In the past 3 years, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, all those countries carried out unilateral oil and gas development activities in the contested areas of the Nan's Island, the respiratory area. Unilateral action at sea by corrupt countries tended to trigger security emergencies featuring confrontation between military, police, and the civil law enforcement forces, which will undoubtedly have a negative impact on bilateral relations between China, the Philippines, between China and Vietnam, between China and Malaysia, and so on. In 2002, China and 10 ASEAN countries signed a declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea, in short, the DOC, in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. Under the DOC framework, China and ASEAN countries have carried out a series of practical cooperation at multilateral and bilateral levels. For example, at the multilateral level, they set up a hotline platform for senior diplomats to respond to maritime emergencies, conducted a joint maritime search and rescue exercises, launched a marine emergency hotline, and built a marine search and rescue information platform. At the bilateral level, for example, China and the Philippines have set up a bilateral consultation mechanism on the South China Sea, and since 2016, China and the Philippines conducted a regular cooperation in such fields as fishing, farming, and maritime law enforcement. Therefore, in the 20 years since the signing of the DOC, our parties have reaped some impressive early harvest in such fields as enhancing mutual trust, conducting practical cooperation at sea, and managing crises, demonstrating its unquestioned and special contribution to the generally stable and controllable South China Sea. As we know, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the signing of the DOC, a special year for China ASEAN countries who are committed to peace and stability, as well as maritime cooperation in the South China Sea. Taking this as an opportunity, they need to review their experience and learn lessons, starting with building consensus and enhance mutual trust. They needed to focus on new ideas and new paths, and guided by win-win cooperation, write a new chapter on maritime cooperation and governance in the South China Sea. So now, my suggestions on how to promote maritime cooperation between China and ASEAN countries. My suggestions are as follows. First, we needed to explore a new path for joint development with new ideas and cooperation models. Joint development is the only way for climate countries to develop oil and gas resources in distributed areas and share benefits. When it comes to major differences between climate countries on the issues such as benefit sharing, management model, applicable law, and maritime claim disputes, they can try to depoliticize or play down sensitive narrative and introduce new approaches, such as registering companies in third countries as operating entities by minimizing claims and maximizing cooperation, as did by European countries in the Mediterranean Sea. They can take faster steps to translate the vision of a joint development to reality in the South China Sea for the benefit of our parties. Second, my suggestion is we needed to hold high the banner of the DOC and make maritime cooperation the general trend in maritime cooperation. The 5 areas of the practical maritime cooperation proposed in the DOC, for instance, marine scientific research, search and rescue, environmental protection, navigation safety, and crackdown transnational crimes at sea. So the DOC cooperation, our urgent matters for sustainable development and maritime governance in the South China Sea, especially eco environmental protection, humanitarian search and rescue, and the waterway safety concern, the common interests and responsibilities of our countries in this region. China and ASEAN countries can start in low sensitive, in demand and easy to operate fields. For example, they can set up a joint intergovernmental steering committee, as we did between China and the Philippines in 2019, October 2019, which was started in Beijing, kicked off in Beijing. And also eminent persons and expert groups sign a South China Sea Environmental Protection Convention and build institutions such as a cooperation mechanism for coastal states in the South China Sea, providing sustained support for regional cooperation on maritime governance. My third suggestion is the third. A consensus-oriented and a new roadmap needs to be formulated phase by phase and step by step for the negotiation on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. The COC will play an unquestionably important role in realizing long-term peace and stability in the South China Sea and building regional maritime laws and order. Major outcomes have been made in earlier negotiations. However, recently, the United States, Japan, and some other non-resident countries interfered with the COC talks without justifications. And some climate countries hesitated in formulating the COC out of the need for unilateral actions to consolidate and expand their vested interests. With such internal and external factors, the consultation have achieved little progress despite the good rhetoric and lose steam to move ahead. So aware of the current situation, the South China, China and ASEAN countries need to seize the window of opportunity given the relative tranquility recently in the South China Sea. They can divide bigger issues into small ones, take small yet quicker steps, start with easy questions before tackling difficult ones, and assign tasks in order to create favorable conditions for the conclusion of the COC. Finally, with regard to the future China and the Philippine bilateral relations, just as addressed by Captain Ting and Wilson, in my opinion, China and the Philippines can promote maritime cooperation in these areas as joint development in disputed waters, as I mentioned above, and the joint maritime law enforcement by our two coast guards. It was going smoothly between our two countries, and marine environmental protection, particularly fishery resources management, bilateral crisis management in order to avoid accidents and potential conflicts. Most importantly, both China and the Philippines should respect the consensus reached by our leaders in order to address the maritime issues through negotiation and consultation without basing on the arbitration ruling. So I will stop there. Thank you very much, Captain Ting.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu, give us the picture of where we are in terms of the bilateral, not only the bilateral relations, but also the South China Sea issues, which plays an important part in the bilateral relationship. He also identified some driving force and factor behind this problem. I think that's exactly why we assemble here, to tackle with those challenges and problems, bring values and meanings to us as scholars. And also Mr. Wu gave us some suggestions. Now, please allow me to invite our second speaker, Mr. Romeo Banloy, Chairman of the Philippine Institute for Peace, Violence, and Terrorism Research. Romeo Banloy has written many articles in the maritime issues and also bilateral relations. He's quite, many scholars in China are quite familiar with Mr. Banloy. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Captain Tian. Can you see my slide now?
Yes.
Very good. So I'm very glad to share my humble thoughts on the topic, revisiting China-Philippines bilateral relations and maritime cooperation during the Duterte presidency and its legacy. But I will focus my discussions on Philippines-China relations during the Duterte presidency, for focusing on legacies in bilateral maritime cooperation. So when President Duterte assumed his post in June 2016, his major foreign policy decision was to pursue friendly relationship with China. So rather than continuing the adversarial China policy of his predecessor, Duterte deliberately pursued a China-friendly policy, stressing that if we can have peace with China, I will be very happy. So this kind of paradigm shift in Philippines-China relations promoted what we call a rainbow after the rain, after suffering the lowest moment of Philippines-China relations during the Aquino administration, and the blooming of a beautiful flower that resulted in a rapid turnaround in bilateral ties. So Duterte's foreign policy strongly demonstrated the great paradigm shift in Philippines-China relations that facilitated maritime bilateral cooperation. So there was a notion that the Philippines under Duterte was pivoting to China. For me, that was not accurate. There was no pivot to China. China is not the central point of Philippine foreign policy, where Philippine foreign relations swing around, because that is the concept of the pivot. While the Duterte presidency intentionally promotes friendly relationship with China, Philippine-China relation is not the cornerstone of Philippine foreign policy. It is just one of the many areas of Philippine foreign relations. In fact, this paradigm shift to China aimed to shift from adversarial relations to comprehensive strategic cooperation, and to shift gear from confrontation to cooperations. Because the Philippines has difficult relationship with China as a result of the South China Sea disputes. Being friendly with China is one of the many innovative and pragmatic approaches in order to overcome difficult issues with China. What Duterte did was not a biput to China, but to reassert the constitutional mandate of independent foreign policy. Because if you will look economically, the Philippines has greater cooperation with Japan and South Korea rather than with China. And on defense and security matters, the Philippines continues to have a strong alliance with the United States and growing cooperation, defense cooperation with South Korea, Australia, and also Japan. And the Philippines also explored strategic cooperations with India, Russia, Israel, France, Germany, United Kingdom, and the like. So there was no pivot. Duterte was diversifying its foreign policy strategy in order to promote independent foreign policy. But the greatest legacy of Duterte for me is the establishment of Philippines-China bilateral consultative mechanisms in the South China Sea, already mentioned by my good friend Dr. Was Chun. And this mechanism is in fact very important because it is a very essential mechanism for building confidence. It is a tool for deepening mutual trust. It is an important step towards risk management and conflict avoidance in the South China Sea. The BCM also serves as an important platform to promote functional cooperation in the South China Sea. And more importantly, the BCM promoted several approaches in order to reduce misunderstanding, okay, for purposes of pursuing preventive diplomacy in the South China Sea. So through the BCM, the Philippines and China are now seriously involved in a series of peaceful dialogues and frank consultations to seriously promote functional cooperation, manage security risks, and decisively avoid military conflicts despite the persistent national differences in the South China Sea. Well, the first BCM was established when President Duterte visited China in 2016, and as a result of that, they held their first BCM in Guiyang-Guizhou province of China in 2017. And this holding of the mechanism facilitated Coast Guard to Coast Guard cooperation and Navy to Navy exchanges, even regular port visits and other maritime cooperative undertakings among their fisheries organizations and maritime security organizations. But I would like to highlight the result of the fifth BCM in 2019 because it is in the fifth BCM that they created the Working Group on Political Security and Fisheries Cooperations, as well as the Working Group on Marine Scientific Research and Marine Environmental Protections. If you're only aware of the activities of these working groups, you will be inspired by the prospects for greater cooperations between the Philippines and China. And it was also during the fifth BCM when both countries discussed the details of their planned joint development of natural gas and oil in the South China Sea. And both parties can also pursue other joint maritime law enforcement cooperations and even coordinated search and rescue operation. However, the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 disrupted the activities of the BCM, but in 2021, they held their sixth BCM virtually. And it was during this virtual meeting that they frankly exchanged on the following issues: current situation in the South China Sea, maritime issues between the two countries, and ways to further expand exchanges and cooperate on maritime search and rescue operations, fisheries management, ecological conservation, scientific research, and other areas like joint development and maritime law enforcement cooperations. So in other words, BCM provided enough platforms for the two countries in order to really promote maritime cooperations. Through the BCM, the Philippines and China have gone a long way to build confidence, promote common understanding, and pursue pragmatic cooperation in the South China Sea. Recent incidences, if not handled amicably by both parties as a result of unilateral actions on the ground, can destroy overnight all their efforts to strengthen their bilateral ties needed for actual cooperation to occur. So it is very important to really avoid, provocative unilateral actions by all parties in order to sustain the gains of bilateral maritime cooperations. So what are the achievements of the BCM? Well, first, the BCM has improved Philippines-China relations during the Duterte administration. It improved political relations, and this spilled over to economic relations in other areas. And the Philippines economically became one of the major recipients of China's official development assistance. And I will not discuss anymore all these details of economic relations, but let me stress that during the pandemic, China was the first country that provided the Philippines medical assistance to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And upon request of the Philippine government, China sent medical experts to the Philippines at the midst of the pandemic. And in 2021, China became the #1 source of COVID-19 vaccines, according to the Department of Health. And according to the latest SWS survey, majority of Filipinos prefer the use of Sinovac vaccines. And it also facilitated party-to-party diplomacy, which I will not discuss anymore. But I would like to highlight the importance of BCM in contributing to the calming of the overall security situation in the South China Sea. But I raise a caution that maybe this is a calm before the storm, but I hope we will not be able to suffer the storm. But if there is a storm in the South China Sea, we will overcome the storm. And the relative calm contributed to the fruitful negotiations on the COC and the implementation of the DOC, although it is very slow, but however slow, at least we can see that things are moving between the two countries in terms of maritime cooperation. So, as I said earlier, Duterte was shifting its gear in order to promote Philippines-China relations. And his legacy is the bilateral consultative mechanism in the South China Sea. And under the President-elect Bongbong Marcos, the Philippines wants China's ties to shift to a higher gear under his presidency. So if we shifted one, maybe we should have to shift to second, to third, and to higher gear in order to really sustain the gain of Philippines-China maritime cooperation. And how can we do that? For me, I have 4 suggestions in order to really shift to the higher gear in Philippines-China maritime cooperation. First, we have to continue to open all channels of communications between the two governments, and also not only between the two governments, but also among our people, through people-to-people contacts and greater exchange of non-governmental organizations and even think tanks like global governance institutions and like-minded institutions in the Philippines. We also have to intensify confidence building, because we need confidence building, greater confidence in order to promote mutual trust. And most importantly, we have to advance mutual respect. Although we have differences in the South China Sea, we have different national positions in the South China Sea, at the end of the day, we should emphasize that we still have to be kind to each other. We still need to promote good neighborliness among parties in the South China Sea. So with that note, thank you very much for your attention and have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Van Looy. I remember your beautiful metaphors and also your warnings, and we look forward to read your articles, and in particular, your detailed analysis of the Duterte policy help us to better understand the exact meaning of those policies and what we can learn from those experiences. Thank you very much. And now, please allow me to invite our next speaker, Professor Zhang Liangfu. Let me find. Yeah, he's sharing his screen. Dr. Zhang Liangfu is a professor of the School of Law of Hainan University, and as well the executive deputy director of Research Center for Policy and the Law of the South China Sea, Hainan Province. Professor Zhang, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Dear King. Thank you, everyone. I'm sharing my PPT. Could you have a look at my share PPT?
Not yet.
Not yet.
你得打开。我们现在光看到你那个，或者你选错了文件夹 ，I think 你应该是选那个打开的文件。 你把那个文件打开，然后再重新选择一下这个共享屏幕。
再重新写一下是吧
？OK，
哦呦，
刚才那个打开了，刚才那个选的是打开的。
哦，那也好。
你再选择一下，选择打开的那个文件。对，现在可以了。你把它全屏。OK，please proceed。
选择播放，选择播放。
选择播放是吧？Thank you everyone. I'm with my panel to share my viewpoints with everyone. Now I'm working at the School of Law, Hainan University. But several years ago, I worked at China National Offshore Oil Corporation. So today I want to share my viewpoint on joint development in the South China Sea between China and the Philippines. As well known to all of us, the search for oil and natural gas is seen by some as a driving factor in rival claims to the South China Sea. China and the Philippines both want to increase domestic oil and gas production to meet its energy demands. The disputes over Ireland's sovereignty and maritime boundary have been preventing two countries from exploring and exploiting the rich oil and gas resources in the South China Sea. Joint development of oil and gas in overlapped maritime areas is the most practical option. For the several years, China and the Philippines have reached consensus on joint exploration for oil and gas in the South China Sea. In June 1975, China and the Philippines normalized relations by then President Ferdinand Marcos, father of the elected President Ferdinand Romulus Marcos. And in the joint communique for that purpose, the two governments agreed to settle all disputes by peaceful means without resorting to the threat or use of force. In June 1986 meeting with Philippine Vice President Salvador Noria, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping pointed out that the South China Sea issue could be shelved for now, not that these issues stand in the way of our friendly relations with the Philippines and with other countries. In April 1988, when meeting with Philippine President Corazon Aquino, Deng Xiaoping reiterated that for the sake of the friendship between our two countries, we can shelve the issue for now and pursue joint development. Since then, when handling the relevant South China Sea issue and developing bilateral ties with other littoral countries around the South China Sea, China has all along acted in keeping with Deng Xiaoping's idea. Sovereignty belongs to China, disputes can be shared, and we can pursue joint development. In September 2004, during President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo's official visit to China, China and the Philippines issued a joint press statement stating that the two sides reaffirmed their commitment to the peace and stability in the South China Sea, with their willingness to continue to discussions to study cooperative activities like joint development, pending the comprehensive final settlement of the territorial disputes and overlapping maritime claims in the area. China National Offshore Oil Corporation and the Philippine National Oil Company signed the agreement for joint marine seismic undertaking in certain areas in the South China Sea. It was agreed that during an agreement term of 3-year period, these companies should connect and process certain amount of 2D and or 3D seismic lines in the agreement area, covering about 143,000 square kilometers. reprocess certain amount of existing 2D seismic lines and study and assesses the oil resources in the area. On 14 March 2005, the agreement was expanded to a tripartite agreement with the participation of Vietnam Oil and Gas Corporation. The tripartite agreement for joint marine seismic undertaking in the agreement area in the South China Sea by China, Vietnam, and Philippine regional oil companies is a good example of the constructive efforts made by the states concerned to enhance cooperation and create conditions for a negotiated settlement of the disputes in the South China Sea. But regretfully, based on the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines, the exploration, development, and utilization of natural resources shall be under the full control of the supervision of the Philippine state. Joint marine seismic undertaking from President Arroyo was regarded as illegal and unconstitutional. Due to the lack of awareness for cooperation from the Philippines side, the China, Philippines, Vietnam tripartite marine seismic undertaking has failed to move forward. In November 2018, the two countries signed the memorandum of understanding on cooperation on oil and gas development. The two governments decided to facilitate oil and gas exploration and exploitation in relevant maritime areas. The President Rodrigo Duterte and the Chinese President Xi Jinping witnessed the exchange of memorandum. But now, when the new administration will begin in the Philippines, I want to seeing the way forward for the joint development. First, I want to say unilateral acts cannot be carried out smoothly. The unilateral acts of exploring for oil or gas in the South China Sea by the Philippines have been interrupted, delayed, or suspended. For example, since 2015, all petroleum exploration contracts by the Philippines have been subject to a moratorium, partly due to the maritime disputes. The service contracts are still under moratorium. In the coming years, any unilateral oil and gas development actions cannot be carried out smoothly because the China will not permit or tolerate any unilateral acts by the Philippines. In the future negotiation on the joint development, we should acknowledge that the South China Sea Arbitral Award should not be taken into cooperation because the South China Sea Arbitral Award is null and void. China does not accept or recognize the award. The arbitration should not affect the consultation and the negotiation concerning joint development in the South China Sea between China and the Philippines. Second, the domestic laws and regulations should not be obstacles. According to the UNCLOS, pending final settlement of maritime disputes, the states concerned should exercise restraint and make every effort to enter into provisional arrangements of a practical nature. Promoting joint development while sharing differences has become a general state practice. Relevant cooperation and joint development are without prejudice to the final delimitation or positions of the parties concerned. Joint development at the disputed areas is not based on one country's domestic laws, but on applicable rules of international law or by the ways the parties concerned agreed. Cooperation on oil and gas development at the non-disputed waters is certainly decided by its domestic law of the related countries. Joint development at the disputed areas is not decided by one country's domestic laws, but by international law and international practice, consistent with applicable rules of international law, or by the ways the parties concerned agreed. For example, in November 2018, the two countries signed the Memorandum of Understanding on Cooperation on Oil and Gas Development. This Memorandum of Understanding will be without prejudice to the respective legal positions of both governments. This MOU does not create rights or obligations under international or domestic law. So, in the future, both China and the Philippines should not apply its own domestic laws and regulations to the joint development. For example, the Philippines domestic law under Articles Section 2 of the 1987 Constitution, the exploration, development, and utilization of natural resources shall be under the full control of the supervision of the Philippine state. So both the 1987 Constitution, some the Philippines think that so for China, China's domestic law also provided that all resources, including the natural gas and oil in the South China Sea, under China's administration, should be developed according to Chinese law. So when two countries only apply its own domestic law to the joint development, we can't find any legal basis from each country's domestic law. So we should put aside each country's domestic law to seek joint development. The third question is about where are the relevant sea areas in the South China Sea for the future joint development. According to the MOU, what areas are considered relevant is to be defined. We could include the sites previously targeted for joint development, such as Red Bank. We could include any other areas identified by both parties, even undisputed areas that China does not claim. Two areas are being considered for the possible joint exploration. Service contract 57, which covers northwest Palawan, and SC 72, which refers to Red Bank. The SC 72 is within the Chinese claimed areas, and the SC 57 is outside of the Chinese claimed areas. So when SC 57 is located in a non-contested area, Chinese oil companies can participate in the development according to the Philippines' domestic laws and regulations, while Red Bank is disputed, which requires an agreement from both parties for the deal to push through, consistent with applicable rules of international law. Conclude, I think the issue of the South China Sea involves a number of states. Its final resolution demands patience and political wisdom from all parties concerned. The parties concerned shall seek proper ways and means of settlement through consultation and negotiation on the basis of respect for history and international law. Pending is the final settlement, joint development of oil and oil resources at the sea is one kind of provisional arrangements pending the maritime delimitation between China and the Philippines. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Zhang. Professor Zhang helped us review the history of the joint development between the two countries, and also gave us some suggestions. And now please allow me to invite our next speaker, Mr. Bobby Tuazon. He's the Director for Policy Studies and in-house policy analyst of the Center for People Empowerment in Governance. Please, the floor is yours.
I think the professor has internet problem. Can we invite Professor Anna Malindog-Uy to speak first,
Okay.
maybe? Captain
Yes.
Tian, because he's
Okay.
in the
It's
province.
okay. Let's
Internet problem.
It's okay.
Yes.
Professor Anna, please first allow me to find your title. Professor Anna Malindog-Uy. He's a professor of political science, international relations, Southeast Asia and China studies. The first group of speakers are keynote speakers, and now since we are missing one professor, now we begin our next session of commentators. So Professor Anna, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for that very generous introduction to the organizer of this forum with the theme Revisiting Philippine-China Bilateral Relation and Maritime Cooperation during President Rodrigo Duterte's era and its legacy, to my co-panelists in this forum, to our media friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant afternoon to all. In the area of foreign policy, President Rodrigo Duterte was successful in his independent foreign policy of being a friend to all, an enemy to none, which has benefited the country a lot, both economically, security-wise, and even amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Under the Duterte administration, independent foreign policy established on fostering a broader and differentiated set of relationships solely based on Philippine national interests, designed to maximize the country's autonomy, security, and prosperity. Duterte changed foreign policy considerably by reorienting the Philippines' diplomatic relation to a more friendly and constructive relations and engagement with China, as opposed to a more pro-United States stance, going against the antagonistic relationship towards China under the late President Benigno Aquino III's administration. President Duterte, during his term, introduced a rapprochement policy, or what you call the reestablishment of cordial and friendly relation towards China upon ascending to the office of the presidency in 2016. I think this is one of the legacies of his administration. Indeed, Duterte has spent almost 6 years repositioning the Philippines from a staunch pro-American stance toward a neutral one by pursuing an independent foreign policy, intending to find a geopolitical non-aligned position or a middle ground between the US and China, where the Philippines remains a friend of the former, but at the same time deepens its friendship and mutual understanding of the latter from an economic perspective to maximize national interest. Hence, the Philippines was indeed able to redefine its relationship with its most important partners like China and the US, by positioning itself to better advance its interests in an evolving, ever volatile and tension-driven regional order. Under President Duterte, the Philippines has forged deeper, friendly, and cooperative relations with China on areas, issues, and matters where there already existed mutual understanding and where the two countries have no disputes or differences, such as economics and trade, science and technology, cultural exchanges, and people-to-people relations. At the same time, it tries to resolve its differences and conflict of interests with China, more specifically in the South China Sea, through diplomatic and peaceful means within the ambit of ASEAN. This foreign policy shift, to some extent, boasts the mutual understanding, trust, and confidence between the two nations, noting that China and the Philippines are close neighbors across the sea, sharing time-honored bonds of friendship. Indeed, the Philippines and China mutual understanding and cooperation have withstood the test of time. Despite differences over the disputed South China Sea, the cooperation between the Philippines and China in the areas of bilateral trade and economics, people-to-people relation, high-level exchanges, the synergy of the Build program of President Rodrigo Duterte with the Build and Road Initiative of China, anti-pandemic cooperation, and others have brought continuous tangible benefits to the peoples of both countries. During the 6 years under President Rodrigo Duterte's administration, China has become the Philippines' largest trading partner, the country's second largest source of foreign investment, the largest export market, and the largest source of imports for the Philippines today. Indeed, the economic and infrastructure cooperation between the two countries has grown significantly. But definitely, there's still a greater space for further partnership and cooperation to enhance two-way trade and investment, for China to continue the support for the Build program of the Philippines, for both countries to work closely to address the impact of climate change, and for both countries to carry on with the mutual support in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. At the regional level, under the Duterte presidency, both countries, the Philippines and China, support, reaffirms, and uphold the importance of ASEAN centrality in matters such as regional security architecture, regional order, and the power dynamics between external powers that have interest in the region, and the renewed commitment to bring peace, progress, and prosperity to the region, and the significance of the continuous discussion and the conclusion of the Code of Conduct on the South China Sea. Most importantly, under the Duterte administration, the Philippines and China agreed and stressed the need to exert all efforts to maintain peace, security, and stability in the South China Sea by exercising restraint, dissipating tensions, and working on a mutually agreeable framework for functional cooperation. This means that even if a dispute exists in the South China Sea among claimant states like the Philippines and China, both are committed to broadening the space for positive engagement, which embodies the dynamic and multidimensional relation between the Philippines and China. Under the Duterte presidency on maritime cooperation in the area of oil and gas exploration, the Philippines and China signed a memorandum of agreement, or MOA, on joint oil and gas exploration in the West Philippine Sea, more specifically in the Reed Bank, during the visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping in November 2018. The MOA states that the two countries have agreed to accelerate arrangement for joint exploration in maritime areas following international law. China has pledged to give the Philippines the more significant chunk, 60% of the planned joint project revenues. This agreement or this arrangement is consistent with Philippine laws, which mandates 60 to 40% sharing arrangement in revenues from utilizing the country's natural resources in favor of the Philippines. All these are testament to the deepening friendship and mutual understanding between the Philippines and China, and serve as a win-win compromise that will benefit both nations and their peoples. Furthermore, the bilateral ties and cooperation with the Philippines and China have gained further momentum and impetus with the inauguration last April 5, 2022 of the Binondo Intramuros Bridge, and the recent telephone summit between the Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte and President Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China. The recent telephone summit between the two presidents demonstrates the two countries' positive and constructive partnership, cooperation, and deepening friendship. Furthermore, under the Duterte presidency, the bilateral relations between the Philippines and China have been elevated to a comprehensive strategic cooperation, which signifies the two countries' cooperative, pragmatic, and friendly ties gaining momentum and vigor. Undoubtedly, Philippines-China relations have gained some new vitality under the Duterte administration. Indeed, the renaissance of the Philippines-China bilateral relation, despite existing differences, is one of the legacies of the Duterte administration that has yielded tangible and concrete benefits for both country and their peoples. On the sensitive issue of the disputed South China Sea, the Philippines and China should join hands to handle the South China Sea dispute properly. Filipinos and the Chinese people in general must take cognizance that the two countries' differences over the disputed waters of the South China Sea are just a tiny part of the bilateral relation of the Philippines and China. Both countries should focus on positive aspect that bilateral relation, which brings tangible economic benefits to both countries, while actively resolving its differences over the disputed waters of the South China Sea through peaceful means, diplomacy, and dialogue at all levels possible. The Philippines and China and the rest of the claimant states should actively seek and explore joint bilateral and multilateral cooperation in fishery management, environmental cooperation, and oil and gas joint development and exploration, among others, which are important economic issues that might trigger potential conflict if not addressed. All this might boast and trigger mutual trust and confidence between the two countries if given a chance, attention, and due consideration, which may serve as a win-win compromise that will not only benefit both the nations, but may trigger the resolution of dispute between the two countries over the disputed South China Sea. Likewise, under the ASEAN mechanism, the Philippines and China should actively call and push for the conclusion of the negotiation of the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, and dialogue without the intervention of the United States and other countries not party to the dispute with a great deal of ingenuity, firm resolve, and political will. An ASEAN-China's Code of Conduct on the South China Sea will create new forms of commonality and cooperation among the parties through dialogue and negotiation. The COC is vital as it provides a framework of rules, principle, norms, and decision-making procedures for the management and resolution of the dispute among the claimant states over the South China Sea. It is a viable diplomatic mechanism as it can provide international rules-based order for the South China Sea. Indeed, the dispute over the South China Sea must be resolved by the claimant countries alone through bilateral relation and multilateralism within the ambit of ASEAN mechanism like the COC, because this is by far the most pragmatic and the viable avenue to the easing of tension over the disputed water that is accepted by all parties concerned. The process of building consensus may prove to be difficult, but that is not impossible, while confrontation on issues surrounding the disputed waters is indeed self-defeating. To note, China and ASEAN member states have reached an unequivocal consensus that they will work together to safeguard peace and stability in the South China Sea through dialogue and consultation based on consensus. The US and other countries not party to the dispute should refrain from intervening so as not to muddle and complicate the issues surrounding the South China Sea further. Likewise, China and claimant states like the Philippines, Vietnam, and others must take greater responsibility and behave constructively and responsibly as stakeholders. On another note, as important members of the Asia-Pacific region, the Philippines and China should remain strongly and firmly committed to an independent foreign policy, upholding the ASEAN centrality, which is centered on regional cooperation architecture while deepening the China-ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Both countries hopefully should further contribute to the stability and prosperity of the region. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, thank you for your attention and good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Anand. Thanks for your suggestion, not only from the bilateral level, but also under the ASEAN mechanism. I think in analyzing the developing of the Duterte foreign policy, you explained to us how to take advantage of the shared maritime neighbor identity, to take advantage of this to bring goodness to both peoples. And also, you emphasize the importance of how to join the national policy of each country together to bring goodness and wealth and prosperity to both peoples. Thank you very much. And also, it is quite impressive you mentioned that the South China Sea dispute is only a tiny part of the overall relationship between China and the Philippines. It's quite impressive. Thank you again. Now, let me invite our next commentator, Mr. Leo Mo Apotadero. He's the professor of University of San Augustine. He will be followed by Senior Colonel Wang Xianying. Professor Liu Miu, please, the floor is yours. Is he online, available? Yeah, you are on the mute.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
In just over a month's time, the world will witness the inauguration of the new president of the Philippines. Included in the gala and pageantry of the event is one important fact. The new president will swear to defend and uphold the Constitution. President Duterte also did that in 2016. Many things have happened since then. An American Duterte was elected in November that year only to lose in his re-election bid. There was the Marawi siege and then the COVID pandemic. But this did not define his presidency. Weeks after he became president in July 2016, the International Tribunal of the Law of the Seas awarded a favorable arbitral ruling to the Philippines. How the Duterte administration steered the nation through the uncharted path in international maritime law and navigated safely the intricacies of diplomacy in a world that is becoming multipolar in terms of security and economic powers would be his legacy to a grateful people. He kept the Philippines out of harm's way during his watch. The International Crisis Group considers the South China Sea as the 21st century flashpoint, taking into account its critical maritime passage location as a means of supplies and trade. The same think tank also noted in November 29, 2021, that the disputes in the South China Sea are fundamentally about claims of sovereignty. However, the Chinese-US rivalry loads the dissension with geopolitical significance. We are bound by a mutual defense treaty with the United States. The Philippines is one of 16 non-NATO countries that the US State Department considers as its major allies. Yet, we are neighbor to a rising power who has become assertive over its own claims of sovereignty over the South China Sea. I see the US today as the United Kingdom in the interwar period of the last century. As Great Britain was fending off the causes of nationalism in her colonies, so is the United States today deluding itself of the extent of its persuasive power by way of economic and military might. Why then did the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates not take the call of its president in connection with the Ukraine crisis? The international crisis groups view the South China Sea conflict as a rivalry between a rising China, challenging the US-led rules-based international order during a time of epochal power transition. The think tank continues that while the US aims to preserve the post-World War II order, in serving its own interests, China seeks influence commensurate with its growing military might. Caught in between the middle of a power play over the South China Sea, President Duterte had only to rely on the very constitution he swore to defend and uphold. Article 2, Section 7 of our Philippine Constitution provides the state shall pursue an independent foreign policy in its relation with other states. The paramount consideration shall be national sovereignty, territorial integrity, national interest, and the right of self-determination. Their approachment towards China, some derided it as an appeasement, was highlighted by many calculated acts from our diplomatic ends. Then DFA Secretary Perfecto Yasay said that the Filipinos would no longer be America's little brown brothers anymore. President Duterte, while in China, said that he could abandon the US and would turn to China. And there was the threat to terminate the BFA. President Duterte visited China 5 times and met Chinese President Xi Jinping in 8 bilateral meetings. He never visited the United States. During his term, China has become the largest market for Philippine products, and China is also the largest source of imports for Philippines. The growth in our trade between the two countries has grown by double digits since then. Chinese tourists accounted for the second largest group in terms of tourist arrivals in the Philippines. And of course, we all remember that the first vaccines given to our people were courtesy of the generosity of China. 1 million doses given as a gift and as a generous action of the people of China. And there is that memorandum of understanding on oil and gas development between the Philippines and China. The document was signed on November 20, 2018 by Philippine Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin and his counterpart Wang Yi. It was entered to facilitate the cooperation on developing oil and gas resources in relevant maritime areas, including the West Philippine Sea. It, however, steers clear of any conflict in territorial claims by declaring that all discussions and negotiations made by the two countries pursuant to the deal will be without prejudice to the respective legal positions of both countries. China diplomacy has been guided by the 5 principles. The principles of mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Second, mutual non-aggression, mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and cooperation for mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. More recently, China advances a noble argument, a community of common destiny, to improve on the rule-based international order favored by the West. Officially known as a community with a shared future for mankind, it expresses China's aim to a new framework of international relations which would promote and improve global governance. The Constitution of the People's Republic of China was amended in 2018 to include the phrase in the preamble. As the first major amendment of China's foreign policy in more than 4 decades, it shifted the focus from being a nation-oriented to focusing on the world, the whole of humankind. The phrase was first used by former General Secretary Hu Jintao and has been frequently cited by current President Xi Jinping. The phrase may be contrary to the conventional thought that the Great Wall defined China, her people, and her psyche. Julia Lovell, in her 2007 book, The Great Wall, China Against the World, wrote how the wall winds, quotation mark, through the lives of millions of individuals who supported, criticized, built, and attacked it. Legendarily 2,200 years old and 4,300 miles long, the Great Wall of China seems to make an overwhelming, confident physical statement about the country it spans, about China's age-old sense of itself being an advanced civilization anxious to draw a clear line between itself and the barbarians at its border, close quotation. China is, however, in a coming out party, and it has a well of over 3,000 years of continuous existence to draw guidance for action for any occasion. China may as well refer to the Confucian goals of amity, peace, and harmony among peoples. David, from the insular cases to the Jones Act, to the parity rights, to Laurel Langley, the Philippines has our own versions of unequal treaties. Robert Vickers wrote in The Scramble for China, Foreign Devils and the Qing Empire, 1832 to 1914, quotation mark, a powerful global China is unprecedented. This provides new food for thought especially as Chinese youth comes out of the world equipped for an instinctive indignation of China's past humiliation and what they feel to be contemporary echoes of this. Profanities included, President Duterte has only articulated our own indignation. He has added to our voice the call for the rectification of our historical faults by way of crafting a truly independent foreign policy. That is his legacy, not only in terms with bilateral ties with China, but in our relations with other states. In doing so, President Duterte has made every Filipino stand tall and proud in dealing with the world. In a community with a shared future of mankind, every Filipino can declare, "Ako'y Filipino, taas noo kahit kanino." Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for bringing also some legal aspect to the discussion. And I think, will the South China Sea arbitration ruling be obstacle for the development of the two relations, and how to balance the two relations between the two powers, given the background of big power competition? Those are two issues has to be addressed by President Duterte. I think he has given us a good answer. Thank you very much. And you also mentioned about the China's law, history, and culture. I think many of the, you also mentioned of the Confucian. I think many of the Chinese cultures are also shared by all Asian peoples. These are all Asian culture, Asian values. I think with those Asian wisdom, we can find a way out. Thank you very much. And now, please allow me to invite our next speaker, retired Senior Colonel Wang Xianyun. Mr. Wang Xianyun, and now is the director of a Center for American Studies in the Global Governance Institution. He used to be the defense attaché of China to Philippines. Senior Colonel Wang, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I would like first to pay tribute to President Duterte for his great achievements. My comment will start from internal development of the Philippines, since it will provide me with the logic to understand the Philippine foreign policy and President Duterte's China policy and its turnaround of the bilateral relations. As an outsider, allow me to humbly say something on internal affairs of the Philippines. President Duterte's high popularity in the Philippines rests upon his earnest addressing people's concerns and vigorous tackling the issues of development and safety and security. The president has been maintaining a record high trust rate and approval rate throughout his presidency, higher than any of his three predecessors. His average approval rate is over 75%, sometimes even higher than 90%. How to explain this? Some opposing media or his political opponents say that this might be attributed to his team's effectiveness to manipulate social media or to spread the misinformation, and even by intimidating the people who are interviewed. To explain this, I think need to understand what President Duterte has brought to the country. The past 6 years has seen a real change in the Philippines, which was the change President Duterte promised to deliver and has done so truthfully. His administration has brought better life for the Philippines. His success anchors with his precise cognition of the thoughts and requirements of the people. To simply put, he has subtly felt the pulse of the people and the country, I still remember that once I joined a FAFA tour to visit the Davao city, then President Duterte was the mayor of the city. When FAFA team just paid a courtesy quote to the president, to the mayor Duterte, and reacting to one question asking whether he would like to run the president next year. His answer is, if people need, I will consider. Actually, people need him, and he really understands people's needs. They want to live safe and comfortable lives, both aspects of which have faced tough challenges at the time. Therefore, quite reasonable that after taking office, President Duterte prioritized both development and security issues as his top agenda. We can list a broad scope of his internal policies and reform agendas, including but not limited to, first, implementing anti-drug, anti-crime, anti-corruption, fighting terror, counterinsurgency strategies to ensure safety, security, and justice of the country. Two, the maintaining high GDP growth rates with sustainable poverty reduction achievement. Meanwhile, reforming the medical and education sectors to guarantee the universal access of people, contributing to the nation's overall inclusive development. Three, pushing ahead with ambitious build program, addressing the badly needed infrastructure issue. Plenty of this country's big projects relating to railway, highway, airport, bridge, dam, etc. have been emerged. Second, I would like to address some issues on his foreign policy and in particular, his friendly and cooperative relations with China. I agree with Dr. Van Looy's the point that we should not just use the word pivot to describe Duterte's friendly and cooperative relation with China, because this word will simply belie the vastness and the multi-layers of the Philippines' foreign policy. Because Philippines has many other foreign partners, we should not just be ignoring. So China is just one country that Philippines should be very much take importance to. So to understand his friendly and cooperative China policy, we should understand that the background of this turnaround, not just coming from the domestic development. President Duterte's national development strategy make him to choose China, to cooperate and to be friendly with China, so to ensure a better environment and better condition, both internally and externally. So we can simply say that President Duterte's so-called China pivot was determined by the Philippines' national development strategy and serves the best interest of the Philippines. Here we can highlight some points of his interaction and achievements with China. Both the Philippines and China stressed that South China Sea issue is not the totality of the bilateral relations and agreed to properly handle it through direct and friendly consultation. As Many experts already pointed out that the BCM, the bilateral consultative mechanisms between the two countries, has been proven effective to advance cooperation and manage and control the difference between the two countries. Two countries' deepening cooperation in economic, trade, and investment fields has become vibrant to the great benefit of two nations and the two peoples. China is the largest trade partner of the Philippines, the second largest foreign direct investor, and the third largest importer of Philippines products. China had finished plenty of infrastructure projects and is pushing forward for the new batches. Great potential has shown for China's participation of the infrastructure construction in the Philippines, because China's Belt and Road Initiative is well aligned with the Philippines Build program. Prior to the COVID, China has stably attained the status of second largest source of tourists visiting the Philippines. China also provided badly needed vaccines to assist Philippines' COVID prevention and control. Also, China adamantly supports the Philippines' anti-drug, anti-crime, and fighting terror campaigns, for which China and the Philippines have undertaken broad exchanges and cooperation. China provided drug rehabilitation facilities in Mindanao, donated several batches of weaponry amidst Maravi counter-terror war. President Duterte once said, China played an important role in helping secure the victory of the war. Talking about defense exchange and cooperation, in addition to armament cooperation, some important achievements need to be mentioned here, such as resumption of the annual defense and security dialogue, mutual visits by military cadets, expansion of Philippine military trainees in several Chinese military academies, conduct of port visits of naval ships, etc., which served for the enhancement of the mutual understanding and the strategic trust. Looking to the future, we have strong confidence to believe that Sino-Philippine relations will drive to a higher gear in a new era. Ferdinand Bambang Marcos Jr.'s election as next Philippine president once again indicates the Filipinos care most the country's development and the people's well-being. Therefore, hyping with the South China Sea issue and stirring confrontation and conflict is not their choice. The election also shows the majority of the Philippine people support the government's programmatic and cooperative approach towards China, and to put the issue of the South China Sea at an appropriate place of the bilateral relations. Given his policy inclination, family legacy, and bond with President Duterte, it is optimistic that the next Marcos administration would quite likely sustain the friendly policies towards China and will be met with the latter's cooperation and support in both internal development and external pursuit of independent foreign policy. Here, I would like to present some ideas for the better Sino-Philippine relations under new administration of President Marcos. As my colleague have already touched the issues of maritime security and cooperation, here I would humbly share some points focusing on other areas. First, strengthening the strategic dialogue to enhance the mutual understanding and trust. By knowing each other's position and bottom line, try to accommodate mutual concerns. Both countries need to also discuss international issues such as AUKUS, IPEF, namely Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, as these issues are impacting regional situation and countries concerned. Second, broadening Sino-Philippine defense engagement to improve the trust and confidence building measures so as to avoid misconception and miscalculation. There are also need to explore more cooperative fields for the two defense establishments and armed forces, such as joint counter-terror training and exercise, and counter-pirate joint patrol in some specific maritime regions, and to explore the establishment of joint ventures of defense industry producing small arms and ammunition, so as to meet the requirement gap of the security forces of the Philippines. Fourth, need to address some slanders, rumors against China's investment in the Philippines. For instance, insufficiency of the investment, slow delivery, echo impact, debt trap, etc. Both sides ought to make clarification about the specific project as needed, while Philippine media is encouraged to report more positively on an achievement, because China will honor its commitment. Lastly, but not least, China will fully respect the Philippines' independent foreign policy and would not oppose the Philippines to develop relations and cooperation with any other countries. However, such cooperation would probably be considered hostile if it impairs China's national interests. President Duterte decided to largely downsize and limit Philippine-US Bilateral exercise, to refuse to send Philippine ships to join US patrols in the South China Sea, and to oppose US to conduct air and naval patrols by using Philippine bases as springboard, etc. All these actions showed how much risky and dangerous situation President Duterte understands US might drag the Philippines into. With the US getting on gear to contain China, the South China Sea will not be quiet. I hope our friends here and other friends in Philippine academia could understand what the best interest is for the country. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Senior Colonel Wang. I hope our Filipino colleagues and friends agree with me that Mr. Wang is a good storyteller, lending his own experience in Philippines to this discussion. And also thank you for your quite frank suggestions for furthering the relationship between the two countries. Thank you very much. And now please allow me to invite our last commentator, Mr. Dai Fan. Mr. Dai Fan is a Vice Dean of the School of International Studies and as well as Academy of Overseas Chinese Studies. He's also the director of the Center for Philippine Studies of Jinan University. Mr. Dai, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone. It's nice to meet so many older friends here. So I remember 6 years ago, 2 months after President took in office, I also organized a conference on China-Philippine relations in Manila. And Professor Tuazong, Dr. Wemel Wilson also attended our seminar in Sanguina Hotel. So now 6 years later, it's time for us to review and summarize China-Philippine relations during the Duterte period. And today, our speaker and commentators talk much about the bilateral relations during President Duterte. Dr. Wu Shichun said that China and the Philippines should manage their difference in the South China Sea and how both sides should make progress on South China Sea. Dr. Wemel and Professor Anna interpret Duterte's China policy and reviewed achievements of bilateral relations. Dr. Zhang Liangfu shared his insightful thoughts on joint development of South China Sea. So I totally agree with the comments. So based on the comments, I will make some also simple comment, and it also my personal review on China-Philippine relations. Looking back the past China-Philippine relations of the past 2 decades, security issue, I mean South China Sea issue, and the innovation of external big powers might be the most 2 important factors influencing China-Philippine relations. The development of China-Philippine relations depends to a large extent on the control and management of disputes in South China Sea, and also got a power competition in Southeast Asia, especially in South China Sea. So the security issue between China and the Philippines is managing the South China Sea here. So over the past 2 decades, the South China Sea issue has increasingly posed a structural obstacle to our bilateral relations. However, it's not the case 20 years ago. No, so now I will give some details about our how South China Sea issue and external power influence our bilateral relations from the perspective of history. So, as we know, the 2000 to 2010 is often regarded as a golden period or golden term of China-Philippine relations. And the stability of China-Philippine relations during this period is largely dependent on the control of the difference in South China Sea. So the security issue didn't harm our bilateral relations. Second, the United States was busy fighting global terrorism. It didn't pay much attention to the South China Sea issue, right? Third, China and the United States still maintained total friendly relations. The competition between China and the United States, I mean, the big power competition didn't squeeze the diplomatic options of Southeast Asian countries. So that's why we share a very long friendship from 2000 to 2010. However, because of South China Sea issue, China-Philippine relations during 2010 to 2016 suffered from a West time since 1975, right? Apart from the emergence of South China Sea in our bilateral relations, America's new Asia-Pacific policy, namely from returning to Asia-Pacific to pivot to Asia, intensified its competition with China. Against this background, the Philippines sought the support from the United States as a diplomatic choice in protecting its national interest. But there's no doubt the United States had its own national interest and consideration. Its involvement made the situation in Southeast Asia, especially in South China Sea area, more complicated. So as we have seen since the 2016, the strategic competition between China and the United States was further intensified, right? However, due to the Philippines' choice to set aside its dispute with China over South China Sea, and also because of President Duterte's independent foreign policy, the United States' involvement failed to effectively change the diplomatic behavior of the Philippines. So the overall relation between China and the Philippines remained stable and friendly. So as we have seen, the friend and stable bilateral relations during the past 6 years brings much benefit to the both sides. China's FDI in the Philippines also China's tourists to the Philippines since 2016 increased dramatically. China also talks among the Philippine trade partners, and China also invested many infrastructure projects in the Philippines. Last month, a bridge linker Intramuros and Chinatown also finished. It also helped to improve traffic in Manila. So how can we expect from BBM administration? So based on the above historical comparison, and the President BBM managing the security issue, namely South China Sea disputes, as well as involvement of external power competition, might be created in maintaining stable and friendly China-Philippine relations. So first, set aside the disputes over South China Sea. In addition, as Dr. Wu Shichun just said, we should try to seek further breakthrough, namely from DOC to COC, as a way to diminish the structural obstacle for our bilateral relations. Second, decrease the possible negative impact of American factors on China-Philippine relations. Therefore, independent from policy, make balance between China and the Philippines rather than choosing a side, may have to maintain the stability of China-Philippine relations. Of course, I'm not to deny the military alliance between the Philippines and the United States. I really understand the history of the Philippine-American relations. But I stress that independent from policy may have to protect the Philippines' national interest. Next, just BBM, Bamba Marco ever said, South China Sea dispute is just part of our bilateral relations. I do believe we have more common interest in developing economy, promoting people's welfare, maintaining regional peace and stability. Given the big size of Philippine population and also the gap between the rich and the poor, I think, China can do much to help the Philippines in promoting its economy and also promoting, also resolving its gap between rich and the poor. So this is why I have high expectation from Bamba Marcos administration. Okay, it's my very simple comment to our today's speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dai, for your very detailed analysis of the background and the development of those relations. And I think we have finished all the presentations from our speakers and commenters. And now, although we have limited time, still I would like to open the floor for moderated discussions and question and answers. So I will open the floor in particular for speakers within the room. Each one of you, if you have something to add to your presentation, or if you want to say something to comment on other speakers, please raise your hand and I will collect those hands for you to speak, to take the floor. And finally, I would like to remind you that since the time is limited, please be short and to the point. Thank you. The floor is yours. Now I have, let me collect the hands. Sorry. Now I have, I didn't see any hand. Please raise your hand. Oh, Mr. Wilson, please.
Yes, I have a question for the speakers. Yesterday, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said in an interview that Asia should befriend all the major powers of the world and avoid a NATO equivalent situation where Asian countries are forced to side with a bloc against another bloc and against another power. What are your suggestions for Philippine government leaders and even China leaders on how do we react to this suggestion by the Singapore statesman Lee Hsien Loong? Any suggestions? Because we have a unique situation in the Philippines. We had this colonial era treaties about military alliances with the US. Is it, how can we navigate this suggestion of Singapore leader Lee Hsien Loong yesterday? Any reactions from anyone here?
Thank you very much for your very good question. Is there any volunteer from both sides? If there are no volunteer, I will pick up speakers from both sides, at least 2 speakers. Okay, now please first allow me to invite Dr. Baloy, and then followed by Dr. Wu Shisen or Senior Colonel Wang. Please, Ms. Baloy.
Thank you very much, Captain. It has been the stand of the Association for Southeast Asian Nations to reject any formation of military alliance in Southeast Asia. There was an attempt in the past to form the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, but it did not prosper because of the position of other Southeast Asian countries to reject military alliances among countries in Southeast Asia. And that has not changed since 1967. And I think the approach of ASEAN, which is being supported by the Philippines, is to really engage major powers. And that is why ASEAN has a strategic partnership arrangement with all the major powers of the world. And I think that will persist for a longer period of time, because there's really this general rejection of military alliances among Southeast Asian countries. But they want to promote defense cooperation, they want to promote security cooperation, but short of military bloc. Thank you.
Thank you. Senior Colonel Wang?
Yeah, I'd like to say
you are
something.
unmuted, please.
Yeah. I think this suggestion should be well received and welcomed, because traditionally ASEAN just adopting a non-alliance policy and apply ASEAN centrality strategies to maintain its freeing of interference of outsiders, especially some big powers. That is very conducive to maintain the peace and the stability and the prosperity in the region. So, given this background, we would like to suggest the regional countries, when dealing with some sophisticated new development in security arena, should be very cautious, such as how to treat the issue such as AUKUS. This is kind of the security alliance already emerged and approached in the area. So we should just like our friends to think about how to better handle these very sensitive issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wu?
Yeah. Thank you, Captain Ting. Actually, I paid attention to the remarks delivered by Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. That was ASEAN shouldn't take sides between major powers and keeping in neutrality. But in my opinion, it's difficult now for ASEAN as a regional organization to keep neutral both politically, economically, and militarily. If we look at the fact now, the United States it intensifies security cooperation between some ASEAN countries, either partners or allies, and also United States, along with 7 ASEAN countries, initiated the Asia Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So in the future, in my opinion, it's difficult for ASEAN as a regional organization and the countries of ASEAN to, keep a balance, taking no sides between China and United States. As the Philippines, I think, as an ally of the United States, so have to deal with China and the United States, not keep taking sides, to avoid, something like the Aquino third administration did with regard to South China Sea issue. So it's challenging. We should be careful to deal with the relationship between China and the United States. The real choosing no sides. It's important. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question I would like to pick it up from the chat box. There is one concerning BRICS. Dr. Fang Fang, would you please read out the question to the audience?
Okay.
芳芳，你能听到吗？
The discussion in
Okay, I will read out the question. Let me find the question. It's about the BRICS. Well, the question is, recently BRICS held consultations to explore potential expansion to welcome new members in Southeast Asia. Indonesia and Thailand were among those who sent representatives to the discussions. Is the BRICS plus possible Quad plus the recently launched Indo-Pacific Economic Framework? What are criteria or basis for the making new members? What are the benefits in joining, or will the doors be open for other countries like the Philippines? So it is a big question, and not only the BRICS, but also other multilateral frameworks. So I would like to invite Mr. Dai Fine. Would you please address this question?
Okay, thank you. So I think Indonesia is also very big. Is also a big power in Southeast Asia, and for a long time, Indonesia also tried to seek a very independent foreign policy. Yeah, because Indonesia also very smart and not try to choose sides. So even Indonesia and Thailand sent representative to the discussion, I think they will focus on economical cooperation, not on their security issue. So for BRICS, I think the purpose of BRICS should focus on their economical cooperation and peace building for our future. So I don't think the Quad Plus it's good for our for the peace for the peace our world. So we should build a common peace for all the members in the world, not for some special countries, not for some isolated countries. So this is why I think we promote, we welcome, we encourage economical cooperation, and also for a peaceful world, not for only to protect some countries, and we should understand the purpose of Americans' competition in Asia. So it's to balance influence of China. So I don't think it's good for some developing countries in this area. We should keep cautious.
Thank you, Dai. I think we are almost time. Although I saw some hands and also some questions, I think we can wait for the next time to address those questions. And so thank you all for participating in this dialogue. I personally learned a lot from those most informative and fruitful discussions. I think Mr. Wilson Flores agree with me that we can keep this channel open to discuss more issues, promoting the development of a sound China-Philippines relationship. It's one of my persistent views that China and the Philippines must build a sound and solid relationship, because only such relationship can bring peace, stability, and prosperity to both states and peoples. That being said, enlightened by the discussions of experts today, I also have some suggestions for future China-Philippines relations. First, peace and development, either at domestic level or at bilateral and international level, should be balanced and taken good care of in any field by both countries. This also applies to South China Sea. The peace and the stability in the South China Sea will surely bring prosperity to both peoples and help those states achieve development. In the same way, the wealth and the prosperity of both peoples will also help them create conditions for achieving peace and stability in the South China Sea. The South China Sea dispute is a bilateral issue between China and the Philippines, and it should not be internationalized to serve the geopolitical interests of outside party. All South China Sea neighboring states should try to turn the South China Sea into a bond of peace, friendship, and prosperity. Second, as globalization, regional development, and growth is being challenged by developing a false narrative using populism and nationalism, Sino-Philippines relationship should not be taken hostage by advocating populism and nationalism by people from both countries. And as for the South China Sea dispute in particular, it should not be politicized by politicians for political mileage. I think scholars and media in both countries have a special role to play in this regard, to promote professional, objective, and regional voices is our common task. Last and not the least, we as Asian people sharing Asian culture, Asian wisdom, and Asian values must put our destiny in our own hands and not led by others or be disturbed by noises. Only the Filipino people and the Chinese people themselves know what is important, most important to them. The outsiders only put their own agenda setting as priorities. There are countries that always wear colored glasses to observe what we Asians do. When Duterte administration fought against drug dealers and corruption for the interests of the Filipino people, they put forward the label of human rights abuses. This colored glasses disinformation campaign is also conducted repeatedly against China when China established in East China Sea the first ADIZ, Air Defense Identification Zone, in December 2013. They said that it would help expanding China's maritime sovereignty claims, endangering navigation safety of civilian airlines, worsening security situation in the Northeast Asia region. And also when the US conducted its first high-profile freedom of navigation in the South China Sea back in October 2015, the excuse is that there are freedom of navigation problems in the South China Sea. Now, years have passed, and none of those allegations turned into reality. None of seaborne trade via South China Sea is affected. And now we heard that the Quad Declaration vows to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific, implying this region is not free and not open. As I said, the seaborne communication is not affected in any way in Indo-Pacific. It is hard not to suspect that it's just another disinformation campaign in pursuing agenda setting of some individual states. It is more likely that they use the excuse of freedom of navigation to cover up their ambition to maintain military hegemony. I think we, as Asian peoples, welcome any states from outside to bring peace, stability, and prosperity to this region. Asian peoples would never want to see another Afghanistan war, another Vietnam war, another Korean war, or another Russia-Ukraine-alike war. And finally, I do mean to keep in time. Many thanks again, and look forward to seeing you either in person or online next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Good
you.
day.
very much. Buhay.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much to everyone. Thank you.
谢谢，辛苦了。
Chair.
Thank you.
啊，翟老师，梁福再见啊。
再见，再
好
见，
张老师
胡院长再见，
再见
胡院长再见，再见。
Thank you very much.
再见，再见，
Thank you.
王法官，好。
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
结束吧，江林，你把它关了吧。